Okay. Super. So good evening on this midsummer night's dream, maybe, I don't know, something like that. My name is John Kinch. I am the executive director of Michigan Energy Options, which is a clean energy nonprofit. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I'm also the president of the GLREA board and have known the GLREA as long as I've been involved with Michigan Energy Options, which for some of you might recognize it with the name of Urban Options. So tonight we're going to talk about community solar. We're going to get a couple perspectives, a national and a state perspective on this, as well as questions from you. And we have a number of folks that have experience themselves with community solar. I'll talk a little bit about what Michigan Energy Options has done and is doing in this space. First, I want to do a couple sort of logistics here. One, it's not really so much logistics as it is appreciation to thank our sponsors of tonight's webinar conversation. And those sponsors are Eagle, Vote Solar, which is like the Coalition for Community Solar Access, is a national organization working on good policy to support solar. Harvest Solar, solar installer in the state of Michigan here. New Edge Renewable Power, Bill and Billy Hickey. The Public Law Resource Center, which is Don, I think Don Kesky's here. Hi, Don. And then Share Republic. So thank everybody for sponsoring us. We also have a very simple agenda, welcome remarks, which I'm doing right now. I'm also going to hand it over to John Freeman, who is the executive director of GLRA, to say a couple things. I'll give a brief introduction to our speakers. They'll have a conversation and speak to you folks. We're going to have then time for a Q&A and discussion. I think we're going to ask, if you've got a question, maybe you can put it in the chat box and John Sarver will curate that. And if it's a question, John, that we think is reason to interrupt one of our speakers to ask right then, let's please do that. Otherwise, we can save the questions for later. John Freeman will talk a bit about building support for community solar. And I think that'll be about all we need to do for this evening. That works for everybody. So before I introduce our guest speakers, just let me say a little bit about Michigan Energy Options since I'm at the helm right now. We've been around since 1978. We've done a lot of pioneering, interesting projects over the years. But I can tell you a few years ago, we decided it was a good idea to do a community solar project. John Sarver was involved. And we had conversations with our incumbent utility, Lansing Board of Water and Light. We had conversations with the city of East Lansing. And we spent 5 years or so at it, I think. It seems like longer sometimes. But in the end, we were able to get a community solar park on a former landfill site in the city of East Lansing. It came online in 2019 in January 1. We actually were voted the best project of the year with the Michigan Energy Innovation Business Council. And we have planted pollinator species. We have beautiful wildflowers, native prairie going on there. We have 150 distinct participants in our project. It's going well. We've had very little of people dropping off of the project. And it gets held up all the time as a model community solar project in Michigan, and I'm tired of it. It was 5 years ago that we got this project up and running. We're kind of old news. But unfortunately, in Michigan, I think, doing the math, we have maybe 7 community solar projects, maybe a few more than that, but I count about 7, and a couple of them are suspect because they're kind of the voluntary green pricing programs that utilities run. It's not quite the model that we think we should have. And I always use this example. Our neighbor to the west, Minnesota, Midwest Great Lakes state, had enabling legislation passed some years ago, and they have hundreds of community solar projects. I would guess we have maybe a megawatt of community solar in the ground in Michigan. They've got 850 megawatts, I think, last time I counted. So if there's any doubt that good legislation can help move community solar forward, I think I at least feel like that's the case. And so what I'm hoping to see in our conversation is ways we can all discuss and think about ways to support legislation and get it moving, good policy, and think about how we can go from 7 projects or so in our state to dozens of projects in our state, because it's a really wonderful niche kind of solution to our energy issues in Michigan. So I'll step down off my pulpit. for now then, and I want to introduce a couple really good people who are working on this very issue. The first one is Senator Jeff Irwin. Jeff probably doesn't remember me. We've met a couple times. 1 degree of separation between us, Jeff. Nick Acapinti is on my board of directors. I know you know Nick and Lisa because one of Jeff's former jobs was running the Michigan League of Conservation Voter. But most of us in the state of Michigan know Jeff is a long time serving in the House, and now he's in the Representatives, and now he's a senator from the area of Ann Arbor, very progressive. I won't go into all the areas that he has been very instrumental in over the years, but maybe just talk about a few things in the energy world. He's been part of the Energy Freedom Package, which was big deal legislation which passed last year. He's put bills forward to the distributed generation, community solar as well, and other clean energy bills. And Ann Arbor, of course, if anybody's paying attention, is a model municipality in the state of Michigan with its sustainable energy utility is getting going and all kinds of ambitious net zero goals and bringing on-site solar. And they did a millage to fund home energy rebates. Thank you very much, Ann Arbor, because Michigan Energy Options is running that program with the city of Ann Arbor, and we're delighted to be doing that. So Ann Arbor is something we can all aspire to, I think, in the state of Michigan. And we'll give Jeff a chance to talk here first in a second, but let me introduce our second speaker, and that's Carlo Cavallero. And Carlo's with the Midwest Regional Director of the Coalition for Community Solar Access, also known as CCSA. Seasoned government affairs professional and attorney. He served as Director of Business at Aquafi. How do you say it, Carlo? Aquafi?
Yeah, Aquafi.
Aquafi, okay.
Yeah.
Which was a subsidiary of Exelon. We all might recognize Exelon at least. And he's been external affairs manager, at ComEd, another big utility in the Chicagoland area, and has had a number of other roles. And now he is working with CCSA. I'm going to ask you at some point a little later, Carlo, about changing teams and get some insight from there. But that's a great background to have you working on the solar work across the country of ours. So with that, and I don't want to ask too many hardball questions, but I might start out with one hardball question at least is, why can't Michigan get community solar across the goal line? Why have other states been able to do this and we aren't there yet, despite darn good policy, a good bill, written with the idea that we learned from some of the other bills that were out there before us about what was good and what was perhaps not so good. And it isn't without trying, because we've had Jeff and Sam Singh and others involved with this for a number of years. So Jeff, do you mind tackling that at some point? But also feel free to just I know you've had a busy night. Feel free to let us know what's on your mind right now this morning in the energy arena, and then we can go from there.
Sure, yeah, lots are going on in Lansing, of course. I don't know if everybody heard, but we had a late night session last night and got home at about 6:30 in the morning. So that's a weird one when you're adjourning at 5 a.m. And I was able to go back up to Lansing today to talk about polluter pay with my friends at Eagle and some of the folks in the regulated community. And so there's a lot going on a range of issues. But we're here to talk about community solar. I'm really excited about this legislation. I think it is the perfect example of the kind of legislation that is on the cusp of being possible, but it's not quite there yet. And just to get directly into the question you asked, because I prefer hard questions to easy questions. I'll take both. But what stopped this? Well, what has stopped this is the influence of the utilities. That's what's stopped this. It's the influence of their political connections. It's the influence of the giving that they do into the political process. It's the influence of their connections with their own workers and their own unionized labor force, which has been weaponized against these bills multiple times. And, that's really what it is. And, I don't know. I don't really know how different Michigan is than other states, because I've, spent so much time here in Michigan and haven't looked really closely at the energy markets in other states. But we are a state that has two Goliath investor-owned utilities that are guaranteed a monopoly, and they don't like anybody else playing on their playground, and they invest heavily in making sure that doesn't happen. But what I think is working in our favor are a couple things. One, this is bipartisan, and so In a weird environment in Lansing where you've got a 1 vote Democratic majority, I don't think we could pass something like this if we had to get every single Democrat, bar none. There's just too much influence that the utilities have had over the years to think that we would be successful with that. But this legislation is bipartisan. I've introduced this legislation along with my partner Ed McBroom from the Western Upper Peninsula, and we have a small but meaningful group of Republicans who are supportive of this. The other thing that's really working for us is just that this is good policy and that, solar is getting cheaper every year. And there's all sorts of benefits that we can advertise and moving in the direction of community solar. There are benefits for ratepayers, there's benefits for the environment, there's benefits for energy independence, there's benefits, arguably for reliability. And so these are all the issues. And so, when we had a hearing in the Senate, that hearing went really, really well. And, that's because there are so many good arguments for it. So I think what we need to do, just to try to land the plane real quick, is we just need to continue to organize. We need to take advantage of the electoral season ahead of us. And we need to make sure that we're asking our reps and senators if they support this and encouraging them to do so. And we need to continue to, lean into organizations like GLREA and others that are working on this. And, just make sure that you take the opportunity this year when all these politicians are asking for your vote to ask them what they think about community solar and push them in the right direction.
Thanks, Jeff. And also, to be fair, I mean, bills don't necessarily get into statute the first time around. And oftentimes, whatever the topic, takes several swings at it, right, to get it right and to finally get that critical mass to get the vote.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And that's because it's very hard to pass legislation and it's very easy to kill legislation. Not only do we have to get, and this is a critical point, not only do we have to get a majority of the votes in both chambers plus the governor's signature, we have to persuade the folks who control the agenda to put it on the agenda. I mean, I've had the conversation a couple times with the Senate leader directly and with the lead staff of the House leader saying, we have the votes for this. I think, as far as my whip count goes, I think we've got the votes just barely. So why don't you run it? But not only do we have to get the votes and lock them down, but we have to convince and persuade the folks who control the agenda that that's the right move and that the votes are really there.
Good point. Let me switch over to Carlo real quick, because Carlo, you guys are looking at the nation in terms of these dominoes falling, if you will, for community solar. And I know you've been very instrumental in a number of bills becoming law in states around the union. You may know this. I think I'm going to make kind of a wild guess here, but I think we maybe have community solar in about 30 states by now.
22. 22. You're not that far off.
22. Okay. So
22, and they argue. Some of them are utility run, which are a little better than what you see in Michigan as the utility run ones. But obviously the East Lansing, one stands out as more normal towards what we would do. So you have 22 states that are behind us, and there's 20 something ahead of us. There's a few that just won't ever happen. The interesting thing is when I'm very glib, I just sort of in a smart alecky way, just because sometimes you just got to take brass tacks, right? When you're talking whether the legislators, the legislators or wherever they are, leadership or rank and file, it's like 22 states, we haven't bankrupted the rate base and we haven't melted down the grid in any of those states. So like the world didn't end, it's just, shattering DTE and consumers, the tiny little sliver of their monopoly we would crack open is not going to cause them to bleed, one drop of blood from their, in their grand perspective. But Senator Irwin is dead on. This is, we have to make this bipartisan because our margin of error has to be encompass that disparity of power. It's the political dynamic in every state. The utilities are really the main blocking force against community solar. In some of the far more progressive states that are just, overwhelmingly super majorities, the environmental movement sort of carried the day. But even in those, none of those programs are perfect. California just sort of redressed it and really took a step back with regard to community solar recently, which is shocking considering if you need, I'm not going to get into California, it's way too complex, but you talk about a state that's desperate for generation, and specifically distributed generation like community solar is so critical to solving many of their problems. The fact that they took a step back just speaks volumes to that political dynamic of the utilities. So, and and to get to the point of, John, you're hinting at, my background in the utilities, I'm a big fan of them. I think they're what keeps us from the true, there's no such thing as a zombie apocalypse, but you get major urban areas without power for 4 or 5 days, and you're pretty much going to witness a zombie apocalypse because it's going to be mass mayhem.
Right.
And so I do think they have a critical role. For 100 and some odd years. They've basically been, one of the main driving forces to driving our economy. I do think some of them specifically, I'm not going to pick too much on DTE or consumers, could do just a much, much better job of what they really owe the citizenry. And, the only other thing I'd add on, just to get in really quickly, is big picture. As we look to electrify everything, or electrification is just naturally occurring anyways, continuing to grow. I think all across America, we have to decide, are we going to burden, who's going to take the gas plant, the coal plant, the nuke, the utility scale solar, the wind farm, whichever version you pick, which valley do you dam up for a river, for a dam, whatever it is, who's going to volunteer for that? And I think the list is going to be very, very small, because you've got a factor of NIMBYism everywhere. And the beauty piece of community solar is, and I think our one landowner who testified did it masterfully, when he said the 40 acres is going to be the back part of my farm, and you're not going to see it unless you fly over in a plane. And commercial rooftops and brownfields, landfills, this is where we excel, is just the diversity and the nature of it, or the variability, the speed with which we can deploy. You're talking, once the bill's passed and it's all figured out and the program's built by MPSC, you're talking 6 months for a 5 megawatt generation facility to be built and activated. So I can go on all day, so I'm just going to shut up and let
No,
people.
it's great, Carl. I oftentimes try to help people understand there's kind of, the degrees of solar. There's like the large scale, utility scale stuff that's in, rural parts of our state, agricultural land, so on and so forth. Then there's the rooftop solar you may see in a residential area or in a commercial area. Then there's this in between. And I oftentimes talk about community solar as kind of infill or right-sized solar, because it fits in our urban, suburban, exurban landscapes. It can be, like you said, utilizing a former industrial site or brownfield. It's near load. It's on the distribution grid. It's 5 megawatts, at least to the bill we have now, 5 megawatts and below. It's got all these multipliers. You can kind of tuck it in there and do a bunch of good projects, and nobody's going to crow about that.
Yeah, and the key thing about the benefit, you talk about reliability, I think that does not get enough attention. The facility goes in the locale, and every dollar is on the developer's back for all the infrastructure that's needed to upgrade the poles, the wires, the substation that it ties onto. That's all private investment, and it's made back by, the pennies it charges for the kilowatt hours it produces day in, day out. And then it translates that, and they share the revenue with the subscribers and give the discount, which I know you're specifically familiar with. And that's one of the beauties of it. It's green, obviously it's renewable, so it has all those inherent benefits, but it reduces, it's near the load, so it doesn't use transmission. It
Right.
makes the grid use that much more efficient. And every other industry model you look at, whether it's, I was trying to think of another utility, and I came up with this from my background with the water utilities. You put the water towers in unique places around the distribution network because you want the pressure and the supply near to where you deliver. And it's no different. The electric grid is the only thing we don't operate that way. We put these huge generating facilities off in the distance, and then put up these massive transmission lines that go from miles and miles, and lose, power the whole path along the way, till they deliver it. So it's just greatly inefficient. And that's something that's just not appreciated and not discussed enough.
Yeah, and you mentioned utilities. I'm going to switch over to Senator Irwin and ask a question, because we oftentimes refer to utilities and it's kind of monolithic, as if all the utilities are the same. Well, in Michigan, we have transmission utilities alone, which is not necessarily common everywhere in other states, ITC and ATC and so forth. We also have utilities that are investor-owned utilities, which is what we're talking about mostly here, and obviously that's the target of the bill. But we also have municipal utilities, and we have cooperative utilities, electric utilities in the state of Michigan. We have 66 utilities. We added one utility in the Upper Peninsula a few years ago. So we have a lot of utilities, and they're all different in terms of how they're governed, how they're created, how they serve their communities, who they answer to, who they don't answer to. And Ann Arbor has even reached out now and gone to create its own utility, a sustainable energy utility, which is a very interesting idea. So I guess what I maybe want to hear from you a little bit as a legislator is, utilities are, as Carlos made the point, critical to our way of life. They've been around for 120 years. They're a regulated monopoly. And when you say regulated monopoly, most people hear the word monopoly, at least I do. How do you wrestle with that as someone who's a lawmaker with all the diversity in that particular industry that you're trying to get to do the right thing?
Well, I guess I have, my values and, broad goals that are probably bigger than my mortal soul can handle. And then I've got, sort of what I'm working day to day. And so, look, I mean, I think that if you've got a resource that is critical for people to live, it's a natural monopoly. You do not want to duplicate it. Then that is an entity, that is an operation that should be publicly owned and publicly accountable. That's what I think. I think the idea that we guarantee a monopoly and a profit to these private entities it's just daft. It's just so dumb. And but hey, they've got this deal, and I think the chances of me upending it fundamentally and sort of in effect nationalizing our utilities here in the state of Michigan, it's not going to happen. So at least not in the next 2 years I have to serve. And so that's why I focus on finding ways to improve the system we have. And that's what this community solar legislation represents. That's what some of the legislation I have on improving the rules for distributed generation customers and rooftop solar. That's where that comes from. And then finally, that's why I've been a supporter of and continue to push for municipalization at the local level. I've been a part of Ann Arbor for Public Power for a long time. I think that's one of the reasons why the city is talking about doing this kind of mini muni. I hope it works, but I think that what would make a lot more sense would be if we were just to do what the state constitution says that every city has the opportunity to do, and take control of those assets within our jurisdiction and provide power to our people through a relationship with the transmission company and through our own generation. I think that the study that the city did showed that in the long run, that's going to save a lot of money and help us do a better job of meeting our climate reliability goals. So I guess those are some of my philosophical answers to that question and some of the tactical things that we're doing to try to make that possible. And I'm really hopeful that the SEU is successful and that it helps us bootstrap into a full muni. I think there are some folks who think maybe we can leapfrog around the asset acquisition. I hope they're correct. But frankly, I would much rather, just get this done. I remember talking about this back when I was on the Washtenaw County Board of Commissioners with the former mayor, John Heefcha, and this was 16, 17 years ago. And we were talking about it. We were talking about other things we were working on, like performance contracting and energy efficiency and things. And John was a good mayor and a big environmentalist. And we were talking and we were like, look, why don't we have a municipal energy system here in Ann Arbor? Lansing's doing it, other communities are doing it. It would clearly be more efficient and more cost effective over the long run. But we both sort of agreed. And I don't want to speak for John, but I certainly thought at the time, well, yeah, but that's like a 10 or 15-year project. And now what I think today is oh my gosh, if I'd have started that project in earnest back then, maybe we'd be done with it now. And then maybe we could start to enjoy the benefits of public ownership and public accountability of a resource that is necessary for people to live, and it's a natural monopoly.
Great, thank you. Hey, Carla, have you, CCSA, have you guys worked with munis and cooperatives on any kind of policy stuff to get them to do the right thing? I know that Minnesota's law includes the co-ops, right?
Yeah, that was a recent addition. So for
Okay.
the most part, what happens, nobody likes to be told what to do.
Right,
So when we're and when we got to pick our battles, right? So we've historically excluded the munis and co-ops or let them permissively apply. And, our members would be more than happy to, contract with them, advise them, work with them and assist to build the system and turn it over to them. So there's no conflict there. But if you put them in the legislation, then it's one of those things you're forcing the ability to have third party. And for the most part, their utility footprint is generally much smaller and may not incorporate as much open space to even allow it to be viable. So it brings on more water than it brings propulsion. So we just don't, we just haven't delved in there. But we are almost universally in every state, munis and co-ops have the inherent ability to do it if they wanted to. And so our members are always actively kind of knocking on their door and trying to encourage them like, hey, would you like to consider a project here and there? We'd be happy to help you. Sort of like, I mean, that's our one of our members, Lightstar one, I think is doing a lot of the Detroit. Now that's not community solar, but it's a similar, the methodology is similar. So
I want to push on this just a little bit more. I know that around the state, we have our East Lansing project with Lansing Board of Water and Light. We also helped get a community solar project going with Marquette, the Marquette Board of Light and Power. Up in Lance, they have a community solar project thanks to Bob LaFave. And then the first one in the state was Cherryland, which was a cooperative electricity utility to get the first community solar project launched in the state. Like I said, there are roughly 60 non-investor-owned utilities in the state of Michigan. I don't really see anybody else leading the parade with these cooperatives and municipal utilities around the state. Any thoughts as to why they're not charging ahead, even though the IOUs are digging in?
I mean, I have a couple thoughts, and
Okay.
maybe Carl has more, but one is that if you look at the areas you identified, with the exception of Lawrence, those are some of the bigger munis. Those are some of the more sophisticated, more well-staffed munis. With the exception of Holland, I think those are most of the big ones. And a lot of those other utilities you're talking about are really quite small. A lot of those cooperatives and utilities you're talking about are tiny. And so I think that's part of it. But I think that as we can show success with some of those others, maybe you'll see some of the smaller communities. For instance, I'm very fond of sharing with people in Ann Arbor that there's a muni in Chelsea, there's a muni in Tecumseh. Look at their rates.
Arlo, any thoughts on that in terms of?
yeah, I think Jeff answered it perfectly
Yeah.
because I don't know the individual ones as much, but it's going to take a level of sophistication. And at some point, the other factor is when you're running a utility, you tend to have enough on your plate just to keep the thing going. That's really how most of the pure, your munis and co-ops are going to run, is that there's not as much room for ancillary projects and support and funding and, pilot projects for different ways because you own you're part of a multi-conglomerate or otherwise. So they're kind of worried about their four corners of their area. And, they're just like, we're not, we don't need to experiment. We've got enough. And the power is generally being delivered to them. Maybe they do have generation or not. So it's a whole different ballgame if they're going to add it. So,
Yeah, right. I mean, in our state, we have two large wholesale power providers, MPPA and
Yeah.
Wolverine Power, that kind of, oftentimes are the ones, even though the utilities sort of enjoy an operating agreement with those entities, they oftentimes are kind of calling the shots. This gives me.
we have a
I'll
lot
throw
of,
one other thing, which is just that they got to have subscribers. So if you're
Right.
trying to solicit enough subscribers to run a community solar and you're in Onaway, I mean, you got to get everybody to sign up to be successful. So I think that's the size of it also affects their subscriber base.
I agree, Jeff, and I'll tell you what, just between us, it took us a ton of work to get people to sign up for our project. What happened when people were asked a question in a survey, would you support this? Are you interested in this? Yes. And would you even, be a participant of it? Yes. And then we got that thing moving and came back to people and said, okay, time to pony up. They're like, maybe next month or next year.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
very, very labor intensive to get people to sign on the bottom line. And, and to your point, a lot of utilities are awfully small and they don't have the bandwidth to do that.
Yeah, well, let me ask you a question. So when you're working with these potential subscribers, I would imagine that one of the things that is a blocker for them on making the deal finally is that they're still trying to wrap their head around it. And to make that big decision, they have to feel like they understand it fully. And I raise that because I feel like that's one of the issues we have with the legislators as well. Community solar it's a different sort of animal. We've explained it to them several times, but one of the things that would be really helpful, and maybe John, you could be helpful with this specifically. Maybe Carlo has some resources, but I've been thinking we really need to show a couple scenarios, just some case studies to these legislators. Some folks who are, here's a subscriber, here's how it works, here's what their bill looks like. And we don't have to go into like painstaking detail, but we have to tell the story of how this works in a way that the legislators can understand. Because in my experience, when I've had a chance to sit down with a colleague and just kind of walk them through it, there's a certain point when the light bulb kind of goes off and they're like, oh, now I get it. I didn't really understand what this was before. I was hearing community solar, but I really didn't know what it was. And so I think that's something we need to do a better job of. Maybe that'll help with subscribers, but I think it'll also help in the legislature.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Jeff.
thank
Talk
you
about
for
a
that
setup.
segue.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Carlo.
let me just interject. This is why our entire summer for our industry and a lot of our coalition members are going to be, we're going to meet with every single member of the, well, I'll call them the rank and file, but the we don't need to meet with Jeff and educate him, but it's like everybody else, we're going to plan to meet with them. We have one of our members, we developed a really good mock-up of a bill that's really simple to see and understand. And we're going to go through this community solar one-on-one with them via Zoom or face-to-face. And we're going to hit every single one of them, both sides of the aisle. So this way, there's none of this just easy confusion from the other side when it's frantic in the fall and we're pushing for votes or hearings, et cetera. There's going to be a higher hill to climb.
Yeah, great. It makes me think that maybe Michigan needs a guidebook on community solar. I don't know. It's just kind of a wild idea I have. John Freeman, what do you think of that? A community solar guidebook for legislators and other concerned parties in the state of Michigan?
I think there is one.
Well, I think it's a great idea. The guidebook covers more than just community solar, but I think John Kinch is right and I think Jeff is right that a lot of people don't fully understand the whole conceptualization regarding community solar and educating legislators who always have to vote on every single bill. And so sometimes they can't afford to spend that much time learning about each particular bill. And so what Jeff is talking about in terms of a case study, or what Carlo's talking about in terms of a mock-up bill, I think is very important. The bottom line is that we would like to support you, Carlo, in this effort. So we should talk down the road about how our members can help you. I do want to ask Jan, who raised her hand, because she had a recent conversation with DTE, and she heard from DTE why they don't support it. And I want her to share it with all of us, but particularly so Jeff and Carlo could respond to it. Go ahead, Jan.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting because DTE has definitely started to focus on Ann Arbor and building community relationships with folks in Ann Arbor. They started a community advisory group, and Jonathan Peck is on it. But in any event, Andy Caloris, who's their government affairs person, was on the Zoom, and we raised the issue of community solar, and I thought his response was very interesting. He talked about, number one, that we have community solar. My Green Power is community solar.
I think she froze.
Yeah, I was wondering if everybody else lost her.
Yeah, I know. That's the only reason why I mentioned it. I was like, okay, did I freeze?
Jan, we lost you.
Sorry about that.
I thought she was pausing for laughter.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'm gonna take off my video. Xfinity replaced our router. It's horrible. So can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So what was interesting is he talked, and they just raised the rate on My Green Power from what used to be, it was actually less than their normal their normal power rate to I think 2.5 cents more. And so anyway, I thought that was interesting. And then the other thing he talked about was it was more of a justice kind of thing. So that it had to be who was bearing the burden of the costs of
Caution.
yes. And so they're really making that consumer argument. And
That's
so I
our
think
old
it's
argument.
what's that? But I think I think it's important for us to be able to, if we're meeting with folks and also trying to get other supporters, to really address those arguments that DTE is making. So I think the efficiency part of and the resilience, I think those arguments really need to be articulated well, and giving examples of other states that have community solar and what that has done to the pricing and so forth. So I just think it's interesting.
Maybe Jeff and Carlo could respond to that. I mean, I'm sure you've heard these arguments countless times.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the reason why we organized our testifiers the way we did at the hearing a couple weeks ago. We really tried to get we successfully got a representative from Solidarity up there, which is a group that does work in the city of Detroit and in low-income communities. We had a couple other EJ activists who were there who were ready to testify who didn't actually make it because of time. So we've been trying to front some of those arguments around how this affects poor people, to say it plainly. And so the other big piece I think that we've been putting out there, besides trying to put up credible third-party validators who can say, hey, look, I'm a member of the low-income community in Southeast Michigan, and here's how I think about it. In addition to that, we're trying to point out the experience in other states. The factoid that I always throw out there is that Minnesota did this a couple years ago, and now their ratepayers are saving $11 million a year. All these arguments that investing more in a low-cost energy generation is going to raise rates are just don't hold water. And a great example of why is because when they did this in Minnesota, they saved money, not cost ratepayers money. So those are the two elements I usually try to use. And then the one other thing that sometimes I'll point out to people, and certainly mentioned this in my testimony, is that the bill currently, as written, as proposed, requires that 30% of the subscribers to any community solar development are qualifying low-income individuals or nonprofit organizations that serve low-income individuals. So we've done some things to try to address those concerns, but they keep coming.
Yeah, no. So cost shift that's what that's called. No matter how they couch it, it's cute. I was reacting because when they said equity, I was like, that's a unique way for them to now couch it in those terms. But cost shift is the argument, and what they're saying is because of the credit rate that the community solar program is paid, you don't pay for the rest of the grid. Well, just so you understand how rate making works, it's generally the cost causer, pays. So you, as an end user of your utility, buying supply and delivery, you're using every aspect, soup to nuts, end to end of that grid. When you're a community solar development and you're somewhere down the distribution lines away, you're not using transmission. You're not being replaced. You're not being bought on the market or generated on the market and sold. So there's just inherent savings that are attributable to community solar. And that's why, and obviously, as you can tell, this is a much more nuanced and a much more complicated argument than going in and terrifying an elected official by saying those subscribers are going to save money. and everyone else is paying for it. And that's why that's a very effective argument. But this is the hill we have to climb, and we're pretty much used to it. And there's more and more studies coming out to show that community solar actually generates zero cost shift. When you use the rate. And just for a point of fact, the MPSC, who sets all the rates, well, at least the monopoly utilities, investor-owned utilities rates, is going to be the same person overseeing our program and setting the rates there as well. So there's a factor of it's the same thing. And there's inherent benefits that we don't get credit for. So it's always, they talk about costs, we talk about cost and benefits.
Let me jump in just one more time and say something that I always try to share with every group that cares about solar. And it ties into this. I'll get there. So the thing that I just want everyone to repeat as much as you possibly can to as many people as you possibly can is that solar is cheap and it's getting cheaper. Way too many people are still stuck in a mindset of 20 years ago. They don't understand what's changed in the market. Why would they? They don't operate in this market. They're lawyers or doctors or bus drivers or whatever they do. They don't know that the price of solar has come way down. And so I think we need to repeat that as much as we possibly can, to as many people as we can. But the reason it ties into this piece about the utilities argument around how this affects low-income ratepayers, I made sure to say in my testimony around this bill that solar is cheap and it's getting cheaper, and we shouldn't continue to cut out all of our low-income residents from the opportunity to participate in the benefits of cheaper power. And so that's the way I try to position it, is that these utilities, they exist to make money. That's their corporations. That's what they exist to do. And they're going to make as much money as we let them. And here comes along this lower cost energy source that happens to also be something that we can generate here at home and something that's cleaner and more healthy. And these utilities are trying to prevent our low income people and everyone else from having access to that opportunity. Why? Because they want to, take the opportunities for themselves and maximize their profit, which is their reason for living. So I try to turn it back on them and say, no, they're the ones who just increased rates for low-income people by 8% on top of doing it by 4% a couple of years ago and 6% a couple of years before that. People have been getting crushed by high DTE rates. So how dare they come into the Capitol after they've raised rates so much in the last 10 years and say, oh, community solar is going to be bad for poor people. They're terrible for poor people. And so I try to flip the script and say all of that plus finish with and start with solar is cheap and getting cheaper. Let's make sure that low-income people have an opportunity to invest, just like people who have the means to just buy their panels outright and have the property to put them on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thank you. We have a number of questions in the chat box, so we'll turn to those. I do want to not forget to ask the senator if you have it when we have a chance to summarize that package of bills that you guys turned into law, which are wonderful, just what they are and how folks can support them. And again, I want to also remind folks that GLRA is in the space. We've got a nice brief that John and Freeman and others have put together that also around community solar that also kind of outlines what it's all about. There's a guidebook that Marshall Clabeau just put into the chat that GLRA has done working with the state of Michigan, and a number of those case studies, Jeff, that you kind of were talking about are in that guidebook. Thanks. And also finally with the brief, what a letter to your representative might look like that can help you if you're an average person to support something like community solar. So John Sarver, do you want to pluck a question or two from the chat box, or Freeman if you want to? It doesn't matter who.
Sure. Yeah, we got a few
While you're looking for
questions.
these, I just want to add for folks, not only could you send an email or a phone call, try to find out when your legislators are having town halls or community events. Show up in person and ask them about community solar in front of 3 to 20 people who show up at those events. That's another way to get folks engaged.
You
Sorry.
get these guys a coffee too,
Thank
right?
you, Jeff. That is, I was just going to comment on that one because it's like honestly calling and haranguing and chasing them around as much as you can, more so than the large. No offense about the big statements in Lansing and stuff, but I think those happen weekly. I think it's harder when you go up there face to face and you're talking to them, especially at those coffees or those town halls. That's where you need to do it.
I walked into a couple of those coffee meet and greets where their face lights up because they haven't had anybody in for the last 40 minutes, and I've shown up and they look happy.
Hey, Wayne asks or makes a comment, the average community solar project in the country is less than 5 megawatts. And he speculates that might help with the whole, it provides more distributed generation, which might help with the pushback we're getting in some communities with the large utility scale projects. And he has basically, Carlo and Jeff, do you agree?
Yeah, we have municipal and townships slip the bill in support. They've consistently supported us. We talk to them all the time to make sure a lot of the pieces with the siting bill going forward, no negative comments about that, which just it doesn't apply to us. And we voluntarily work with the local units of government for planning, zoning, siting, et cetera. So that we don't have an issue with that at all. And he's dead on. I think the average size is 3.5 megawatts for community solar. And our bill limits it to 5.
It's asked to, what can we, the voters, do in addition to talking to our representatives? Will there be a rally in Lansing? What else can we do to kind of push this concept besides contacting our legislators?
Honestly, that's what we need, kind of leaping back to what Jeff and I just mentioned about the town halls and the one-on-one, face-to-face at those coffees or whatever it is. That is what we need. That I think the constituent voices, the concerned citizen, face-to-face and otherwise, is the difference. Because when we're in Lansing, there's 50 lobbyists walking the floor from each utility. So we're just completely outnumbered and outmanned there. So they need to know that this really matters. We got to teach them that all politics are local and that we need the local to speak. We're organizing the landowners that our developers are working with, and we're trying to work with as many of these associations as possible. I mean, John Freeman is one of our staunchest supporters, and all the other coalitions we partner with, and kind of challenging all those groups to do more. So he's been great because I know, I represent the industry. So we're just as much for-profit corporations as the utilities. So our voice is a little different, but we are the experts in how you get this stuff done. So.
Yeah, and we need that voice despite some of my ranting earlier. There's a few more other things I'll add to the list. One is you're doing it here. So let me just thank every single one of you for being a part of GLREA. So because the suggestion I was going to make is you got to organize, you got to join organizations, you got to, push these organizations to be involved, and you don't really have to push GLREA because that's what they do, but, that's a meaningful thing. So thank you for doing that part and staying involved. Just to put a finer point on what Carlos said, sometimes what happens in Lansing stays in Lansing. And when you make it clear back home in the community that they represent that this is a concern back home, this is something that you're going to hear about at Kroger and the library, not just in your office in Lansing, where you can close the door and leave. This is going to follow you around. That's important to sort of raising the level. And the other thing, I get this question a lot, and I saw it in the chat, which is like, well, my rep or my senator already supports this. Well, then what can I do? Well, you can encourage them to make it more of a priority. It's one thing for a member to say, yeah, I support that. It's another thing for that member to go and talk to the chair of the committee and say, you know what, I support that. I really hope to see it on the floor. I'd like to vote for it. It's another thing if they go talk to the speaker, the Senate Majority Leader, and say, I've been hearing a lot about this community solar. It's really important in my community. Not only do I support it, but I'm asking you to move it, to get it going. So it's not just support, it's support, but it's also the vigor that they're willing to put behind it. Are they going to put themselves out there to support this in any way? And then the other thing, at the risk of repeating myself, we've got an election coming up this year, and every one of these candidates is at their absolutely most vulnerable point right now. And so I would go and talk to them, and if you can, and if you want to, be involved in their campaigns in some way, and make sure that they know, what it is you care about and what it is you want to see. all of that can make a really big difference. And then the final thing I'll say is, don't forget about your friends, your family, and your frenemies. You know, folks in other districts, and that's why it's so important that we're just constantly talking about how solar is cheap and getting cheaper. We have an opportunity to transition to a clean energy economy and save money doing it. The more people who hear that more often, and the more you can maybe turn some of those relationships you have with friends and family elsewhere into them calling or them sending an email, that's another way to maybe extend your reach.
Absolutely. I
Marshall
might
asked
have to
about-
say
oh, go ahead,
is
John.
also talking to your locally elected officials or appointed neighbors that are on planning commissions, or the Washtenaw County Commissioner who then becomes a rep and a senator in the state of Michigan, or the mayor of East Lansing who becomes Sam Singh, or Debbie Stabenow, Gretchen Whitmer, and folks like that who are local, and you can get to know them locally, and they are politicians who work their way up and become major decision makers for the state or even beyond that. And so getting to know those folks and helping them understand the value of some of this is important. We're doing I live in Grand Haven now, but a Grand Haven area community energy plan. And I spend a lot of my time in front of local units of government and commissions and folks explaining kind of what an energy plan is. And one of our intentions is to do more community solar here. So explaining what that is. People are interested. They just don't know. They don't know yet. And getting to have that relationship now, even if it doesn't necessarily lead to anything, might have benefits in a year or two from now when those people go on to other elected roles in the state.
Yeah, Marshall asked about a related issue, which is microgrid legislation. Yeah, any possibilities there?
I think that there are actually, I think that's one of those issues that might be coming in at enough of a sort of strange vector that, maybe it could get some good attention and get some movement. It's not something I've worked on directly since 2011, when we first developed the Energy Freedom Package. The very first Energy Freedom Package, there was a microgrid bill in the package. But then when we subsequently introduced it in subsequent sessions, I dropped the microgrid bill because, frankly, just for messaging purposes, I'd be in front of a group and I'd be talking about community solar, net metering, and microgrids. And I'd spend all my time trying to explain the microgrids because there's all these little details that had to be explained. And at the end of every one of those talks, I would just think like, oh gosh, I'm not getting good information through to people because I'm getting into the weeds on this microgrid thing. But I think it has bipartisan opportunities. I think it could be something that wouldn't be as directly threatening to some of the other players in this space. So I think it has a lot of promise, but it's not been something that I picked up myself.
Yeah, so I love this topic. So I was at ComEd when we proposed 5 or 7 of them. We got legislation that finally went, the ICC, we built one in Brownsville, downtown Chicago, south side of Chicago by McCormick Place. And I also would tell you that community solar and the way it works on a distribution grid, it's effectively a 5 megawatt generator sitting right there for who's ever in an immediate area. If for some reason the distribution grid, transmission grid around it goes down. So it's a natural component to a microgrid going in anyways. I do also think more and more microgrids for those critical, sectors of our society and our culture and everything else are a natural offshoot, but they're a few years away. I know ComEd's, we have a completely modern grid in Northern Illinois. I can assure you that DTE is years and billions of dollars behind. So, but these are conversations that there's no wrong time to start.
Yeah, Rick asks, can we get some union support for community solar?
We're working on that.
Yeah, we're working on it. I think it's important to mention that at the hearing we had, the IBEW ended up coming out against it. They said that they came out against it partially because of, all the work and contracts that they have with DTE. I think also to maintain some solidarity with the utility workers. But we've been continuing to work with them. And I think Carlo's organization has been a big part of that, as have some others trying to break down those walls and get them to see that there's real opportunity for them in this space and get them to lean into what they already know, which is that they have to start to get active in this space because it's a growing space.
We have their supports in many other states, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Illinois specifically. So it just makes sense. I'm working the context in Illinois to teach the guys in Michigan, like, this makes sense.
Yeah, Payne
A little
asks,
self-serve.
Payne wonders why, with the new targets for utilities, the RPS targets, 60% renewable energy, boy, why don't they see the logic? I mean, they're going to need everything they can get. Community solar would be just helpful.
They make more money if they own it and develop it themselves.
Okay. Yep.
There's going to be interesting pressure, though. I don't want to sound, I got to be careful. Just forgive me. I don't want to sound like a naysayer about it, but with the RPS goals, and then I think you saw the discussions with data center increase and AI and just electrification. There's this, supply is moving, things are just completely unpredictable at this point. Nobody's seen this level of growth. So there's going to be a challenge as to where you're going to need everything you can get. But we'd rather be there sooner rather than, trying to catch up.
Boys, well, John Richter asks about, the fact that utilities have a monopoly over generation, and maybe we should, change that.
Yeah, it's been a long run conversation in Michigan. That's of all the things that the utilities weigh in on and care about, that's the number one thing. That's their, most important issue. I don't, I'm a tiny bit out of my depth talking about this because there's a lot to be said, but one of my first jobs in politics was working for Alma Wheeler Smith back when she was a state senator from Washtenaw County. And in 1998, we passed a deregulation package in Michigan that ultimately allowed some competition in the Michigan market, but capped that at 10%. If memory serves, I think there was a different number in the gas market, maybe 15. Anyway, they carved out a small bit of customer choice or competition, however you want to phrase it, but it's always been capped at that level. Every time we've opened up the energy bill, whether that was last year or back in 2016 or back in 2008, every single time there's a discussion about should that be expanded. But the utilities fight that with the intensity of 1,000 burning suns. I mean, that's their number one thing. And so it's been, stagnant for years.
Yeah, Steve makes the observation or wonders about how you think batteries and energy storage kind of fit into a community solar framework.
I mean, we're moving that legislation in Illinois right now, adding storage and paired storage, and we did it largely because it's being driven by the demands of the state to protect the RPS goals, because everything looked good for the 2025, 2030 targets, but when they started looking at 5 to 8 year range out, they realized that several of the generation plants were going to be retiring, and we weren't going to be able to build enough to get there. So they're accelerating storage being deployed. And oh my God, I should remember, but it's like, I think we're pushing for 1,500 gigawatts, 15,000 maybe, because I think it was 6,000 to start with, 6,500, and I think we're adding 7,500, 8,500. My math is fuzzy there, Jeff. So but it's huge. And we expect that the package is going to be coming together over the summer. So we expect you're going to move, whether it's of that scale or not, we have no idea, but pairing storage and adding, batteries all around the state is going to be one of those, leading decisions. New York has it, I believe. So you're going to see more and more of the conversation because it'll be proven to be, useful.
Storage. I mean, I think storage is everything at this point. It's like generation has clean energy has gotten so good, and hopefully continues to get better. But storage is the holy grail. I think it's everything right now. And so everything that Carlos said, I can agree with. But I want to share one little thing because I geek out on this. I get so excited about this. There are some folks up at Michigan Tech and in the state government, including Representative Rachel Hood and I, who've been trying to help fund some investigation of these opportunities. The idea is to build a massive physical battery like the Ludington Pump Storage Station, but in an old abandoned mine, maybe an old limestone mine or an old iron ore mine. The capacity of these mines is several times the capacity of Ludington. And if we could manage to build a giant physical battery in our abandoned mines, I don't know. I just find that really exciting. I think it's a really interesting opportunity, and I'm hoping that we can realize it because that would be a huge, huge asset to the system.
Yeah, Mark asked the question, is there a grand bargain? Is there something we could offer the utilities that would get them more cooperative related to community solar and other clean energy initiatives?
I'm not sure, but I'm all ears if folks have, ideas that they think can, bridge that gap. It was mentioned earlier that, we passed a historic clean energy package in the fall, I voted for that. One of the things I was trying to do in the fall was I was trying very hard to leverage some of these concepts around making it better for distributed generation customers and rooftop solar producers and community solar. I was trying to get those in to the clean energy package. They should have been in the clean energy package, but I wasn't willing to kill the package in order to use my leverage to get that done. So that was the decision I ultimately made, is to support the legislation, even though I think it had some real weaknesses, and the lack of community solar and the limited improvements we made for rooftop solar were disappointing to me, and I ended up voting for the package in the end. But that was my goal, was to get that in, because I think our grand bargain isn't with the utilities, it's with other interests.
Yeah, I know John Freeman has talked to the utilities about, rather than fighting over distributed generation, let's work together on electric vehicle, because it's in both of our self-interest to kind of promote electric vehicles. To me, that seemed like a good offer to the utilities. But hey, John, I know you wanted to say a little more, right, about the Community Solar Guidebook?
Well, I think Marshall put in the chat the
He did.
fact that we developed this guidebook that is a 93-page document about all things being solar. And Marshall can speak for himself, of course, but he's going to be working with local units of government and organizations to really disseminate this guidebook and use it as an educational tool. We're also going to create an executive summary of it so that we can make it a little bit easier for someone to read it, or at least a summarization version of it, so they can get a flavor of it. Marshall, do you want to say a few words about your efforts?
Yeah, I think it's a big opportunity ahead of us now that it's finalized. It's been years in the making. The City of Lansing's already expressed interest, putting it on their website, really looking to tie a lot of the climate action plans, sustainability action plans into motion with some of the solar guide work. So happy to serve as a resource. I put my phone number and email in the chat. Reach out to me, happy to connect and get your city on board with either, the guidebook, but also the Solarize program. Really looking to expand that, and also Sol Smart cities that help cities with their permitting process, kind of streamline it. So we're not waiting for weeks to get solar permits approved, but it can be almost instantaneous in some instances. So happy to be here, and thanks everyone.
Thank you. So as we start to wrap this up, I just want to kind of lay out the takeaways that I'm going to be working on. Bridget's our intern. We put together this briefing on community solar that I shared with you, everyone. I'm going to go back and make some edits to it and make it more of a document that people could use if you go to a coffee of your local legislator. So I'm going to go over these notes and put together an action plan on how we can spend the summer, next couple of months, and going into the fall, and trying to meet with legislators. And so once we make some adoptions and some edits to it, I'm going to send this out to everybody on this event. And then as I hear about these coffees, and Carlo will share them with me, and Jeff will share them with me, then I'm going to try and get people who live within those legislative districts to see if you all can go to those coffees, and you'll be forearmed with this information. And therefore, you can have a conversation with your legislator just how important it is. And just like Carlo and Jeff said, the Michigan House of Representatives, they're up for re-election this coming November. So this is a good opportunity to talk to them that if they want your vote, you should tell them they need to be supporting community solar. So with that, I want to turn it back over to John Kinch, maybe to make some concluding comments. And from my point of view as executive director, I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It's been a wonderful discussion. I want to thank Jeff and Carlo, Senator Irwin and Carlo. So we look forward to working with you as always. But back to you, John, for concluding comments.
Well, thanks. I don't have anything particularly wise to say. I want to thank our guest speakers. I want to thank all of you, thank our sponsors. I will tell you one small little thing. In Grand Haven, this project we're working on encompasses a number of small communities. It's not just the city of Grand Haven, it's a number of other small cities and villages. It's essentially in the footprint of the incumbent municipal utility, the Board of Light and Power, Grand Haven Board of Light and Power. We sent out a community survey asking people all kinds of questions about energy in the future and what they care about, what they know about, those kinds of things. And I was very buoyed by one of the questions we asked, which was about climate change. And the question we asked was, climate change is too big to do anything about it. Climate change is big, but there are local actions we can do that can make a big difference. Climate change ain't real. And we had a few about saying climate change isn't real. This is the west side of the state after all. So you can imagine, but actually even those who said it's not real track pretty well on top of what surveys around the country say. There's a holdouts of 15, 18% out there that just refuse to believe it. But for our survey, 75% of people said, yeah, it's a big, hairy issue, but there's all kinds of things we can be doing locally to make a difference. And one of the things we did, and I might have led him by the nose a bit, is suggest some things that you could do locally that would make a difference. And one of those was community solar. And it scored very high. People really want to have it. They're interested in it. It makes sense to them. It just sounds nice. It's got all kinds of brand possibilities with it. So I think we just have to keep pushing it. I know that it's a squishy definition for some people. I know that, there are some issues that some utilities have gotten a hold of this and they're calling it community solar and it's not. But I still think this is a winner winner chicken dinner for a lot of people who are interested in solar locally. So I hope we can all just continue to stay in touch. Carlo, it's nice to meet you, and of course I'm the senator, but let us all work together and make a difference here this next time around with that legislation. And if that doesn't pass this time, it's going to pass the next time or the next time. So I think that's all I had to say, John. Anything else that I should conclude with other than just wishing everybody a nice summer evening?
No, I just want to thank Senator Irwin and Carlo. I mean, do you all want to make any concluding comments?
Yeah, please. Any final thoughts? You're in the trenches.
Jeff or Carlo, are you guys set?
I'll just jump in and say thanks again to everybody for being a part of this organization and for being interested in these issues and for caring about the future of our communities and our state. There's far too few people who are digging in and devoting their time and treasure to making life better for others. So thank you for doing that. And, let's also make sure we touch base and work together on what's going on with how the administration decides to spend these solar for all dollars that have come into the state to support community solar, even though we don't have community solar. It's another interesting conversation that we should have for another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add on is, John, I'm going to share with you any of the updated materials we have and the mock bill so that you can use that and they can see it for, whenever it's appropriate. And, if we need to do a education session on what the materials have and if anyone's fuzzy about it, we're more than happy. I mean, this effort is what's going to make the difference. All of you, your reps, you're in the communities. So this is what I think we need more than anything. And this is what we're focused on getting organized across this group, as well as many other coalitions that we're working to build around the state. So, but thank you. I could not thank you enough. I mean, you're putting your personal time into this is just phenomenal.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much. And then I think we can wrap this up for this evening. And I'll be in touch, and I appreciate all your support and I appreciate everybody buying a ticket. The money is going to support the organization's work, and so I appreciate that. So have a wonderful evening, everybody.